The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek's cobblestone streets as Reverend John completed his usual post-mass routine. The church bells of St. Michael's echoed through the valley, their resonance mixing with the gentle whisper of wind through the surrounding hills. At 55, John had grown accustomed to the predictable rhythm of small-town life, finding comfort in its simplicity. Yet, this particular Sunday would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his peaceful community. As he rounded the corner of the church, a movement caught his eye. Near the garbage bins, a small figure hunched over, methodically searching through discarded items. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his clothes worn and dirty, his movements careful and deliberate. When their eyes met, John saw something that struck him deeply, a weariness that no child should carry. "It's all right," John said softly, maintaining his distance. "You're not in trouble." The boy remained frozen, clutching a piece of stale bread like a lifeline. His eyes darted between John and the nearby alley, calculating his escape route. "I'm about to have breakfast in the kitchen. Would you like to join me? We have fresh bread and eggs." The invitation hung in the air for what seemed like an eternity before the boy gave an almost imperceptible nod. John led him to the church's small kitchen, where the morning light filtered through stained glass windows, creating patterns of colored light on the worn wooden table. As the boy ate, John noticed an unusual pendant hanging from a leather cord around his neck, an intricate symbol that seemed oddly familiar. "I'm Arthur," the boy finally whispered, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but carried a hint of an accent John couldn't quite place. As Arthur gradually relaxed, bits and pieces of his story emerged. He spoke of different cities, temporary homes, and lonely nights, but something about his tale felt incomplete, as if he were carefully selecting which parts to share. Word of Arthur's presence spread quickly through Willow Creek. Sarah Thompson, the town's librarian, brought him new clothes. Mike Rogers, who owned the local diner, insisted on providing hot meals. Yet others watched from a distance, whispering their concerns about a stranger in their midst. The town was divided between those who saw a child in need and those who feared change in their carefully ordered world. As days turned into weeks, John noticed peculiarities that didn't quite fit. Arthur would sometimes pause in front of the church's oldest stained glass window, staring at it with an intensity that seemed beyond mere curiosity. He hummed melodies that John had only heard in ancient hymns, ones rarely sung in modern services. And then there was the pendant. Its symbol matched a pattern John had seen somewhere in the church's archives, but he couldn't remember where. One evening, as John was organizing old church documents, he found a weathered photograph that made his heart skip a beat. It showed a group of people standing in front of St. Michael's, dated 1945. In the background, barely visible, was a banner bearing the same symbol as Arthur's pendant. When he looked closer at the faces in the photograph, one woman's features struck him as hauntingly familiar. She had Arthur's eyes. The discovery led John to the church's basement archive, where decades of records lay waiting. As he searched through yellowed pages and faded photographs, a pattern began to emerge. References to a group called the Guardians of St. Michael appeared repeatedly in documents from the 1940s, always in connection with helping displaced families. The same symbol from Arthur's pendant appeared on their letterhead. That night, John lay awake in his small apartment above the church, listening to the creaking of old wood and the whisper of wind through the bell tower. He couldn't shake the feeling that Arthur's appearance in Willow Creek was more than mere chance. Something had guided this boy to St. Michael's, and tomorrow, John would begin to uncover exactly what that something was. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to St. Michael's. Margaret Wells, the town's eldest resident at 87, appeared at the church door before the morning service. Her arrival was unusual. She hadn't attended Mass in years, claiming her arthritis made the walk too difficult. Yet here she was, clutching an old leather-bound book to her chest, her eyes scanning the church grounds with unusual alertness. When she spotted Arthur helping John tend to the garden, she gasped audibly. The boy looked up, and something passed between them, a flash of recognition that seemed impossible given their age difference. Margaret's hands trembled as she approached, her eyes never leaving Arthur's face. I knew they'd send someone eventually, she whispered, though neither John nor Arthur understood what she meant. Inside the church, Margaret's story spilled out in fragments. She spoke of her younger days as a secretary at St. Michael's, of mysterious meetings in the church basement, and of families who appeared in the night and disappeared by morning. We called ourselves the Guardians, she explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. This church wasn't just a place of worship, it was a sanctuary for those who needed to disappear. John listened intently, his mind racing to connect these revelations with Arthur's presence. Margaret opened her book, revealing it to be a diary from 1945. Inside were detailed accounts of the church's secret activities, including sketches of the symbol that matched Arthur's pendant. This was our mark, she explained. It meant safety, protection, a promise to those in need. As Margaret spoke, Arthur remained unusually still, his hands unconsciously clutching his pendant. The old woman noticed the gesture and smiled knowingly. That pendant, she said, I haven't seen one like it in over 60 years. They were given only to those we helped and those who helped us. Child, where did you get it? Arthur's response was barely audible. It's always been with me. The lady at the orphanage said I was wearing it when they found me. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she reached into her diary and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a map of Willow Creek and its surrounding hills, with various locations marked in faded ink. The discovery of the map set off a chain of questions in John's mind. The marked locations formed a pattern, with St. Michael's at its center. One spot, marked with a small cross, caught his attention. It was in the hills just outside town, near the old Miller property. Margaret noticed his interest and nodded slowly. That's where they kept the records, she said. Everything about everyone who passed through here. We had to protect their identities, you see. Keep them safe. Later that afternoon, as John and Arthur worked together organizing hymnals, the boy seemed lost in thought. Reverend, he finally said, do you think my parents might have been one of the families the Guardians helped? The question carried the weight of years of uncertainty, of nights spent wondering about his origins. John placed a gentle hand on Arthur's shoulder, choosing his words carefully. Before he could respond, they heard the church door open. A man stood in the entrance, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He was tall and lean, dressed in a well-worn suit that spoke of long travel. When he stepped into the church, both John and Arthur noticed he wore a ring with a familiar symbol, the same one that adorned Arthur's pendant. The stranger introduced himself as James Harrison, a historian researching the underground networks that helped families during and after World War II. But something in his manner suggested he wasn't sharing everything he knew. His eyes kept returning to Arthur, and his hand repeatedly touched the ring on his finger, as if drawing comfort from its presence. Ames Harrison's arrival at St. Michael's marked the beginning of a week filled with careful observations and unspoken questions. He spent his days in the church archives, meticulously examining old documents, while often pausing to watch Arthur from a distance. The historian's presence created an atmosphere of anticipation, as if the very walls of St. Michael's were holding their breath, waiting for a revelation. During his research, James shared carefully curated stories about the Guardians network across America. He spoke of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things, of secret messages hidden in books, and of children who disappeared into the night only to emerge years later with new names and new lives. Each tale seemed to carry a hidden message, though its meaning remained elusive. One afternoon, while Arthur was helping Sarah Thompson reorganize the library's local history section, he discovered an old newspaper clipping that made his hands tremble. The article, dated 1946, described a family fleeing Europe with a precious cargo, not gold or jewels, but a set of ancient documents that could reshape understanding of certain powerful organizations. The family had last been seen heading toward Willow Creek, but the article ended there, as if the story had disappeared into the mist that often shrouded the surrounding hills. The discovery prompted Arthur to share something he'd kept secret. Late at night, when the church was empty except for the whispers of history in its halls, he would dream of a woman singing in a language he didn't understand. The melody was always the same, a lullaby that seemed to carry both joy and sorrow in its notes. When he hummed it for James, the historian's composed facade cracked slightly, a flash of recognition crossing his face before he could hide it. John, watching these interactions with growing curiosity, decided to explore Margaret's map more thoroughly. He enlisted the help of Mike Rogers, whose family had lived in Willow Creek for generations. Together, they discovered that the marked locations corresponded to old properties owned by families who had suddenly left town in the late 1940s. The Miller property, marked with the cross, had been abandoned so abruptly that dishes were left on the dinner table, as if the family had vanished in the middle of a meal. The tension peaked when Arthur found an old photograph hidden behind a loose brick in the church basement. It showed a group of children standing in front of St. Michael's, each wearing a pendant identical to his. On the back, written in faded ink, was a message: "The legacy must be protected. They will return when the time is right." The date matched the newspaper article about the family with the documents. James's reaction to the photograph was subtle but telling. His hands shook slightly as he examined it, and his questions became more focused. He asked Arthur about his earliest memories, about the orphanage where he grew up, about any strange occurrences or visitors from his past. Each question seemed to carry double meaning, as if the historian was speaking in code, waiting to see if Arthur would understand. Meanwhile, Margaret's health began to decline, but she insisted on sharing more stories. She spoke of a particular family, the Winters, who had arrived at St. Michael's on a stormy night in 1946. They carried with them not just physical belongings, but a responsibility that would echo through generations. The husband had been a scholar, the wife a musician who sang ancient lullabies to their child. Margaret's description of the wife's singing made Arthur's eyes widen. It was the same melody from his dreams. As these pieces began to align, the atmosphere in Willow Creek shifted. More townspeople came forward with stories passed down by their parents and grandparents. Tales of lights in the church late at night, of strangers who spoke in whispers, of children who disappeared only to be replaced by new families with familiar eyes. The town itself seemed to be awakening to its own history, to the role it had played in a story much larger than anyone had imagined. The revelation about the Winters family stirred something deep within the community of Willow Creek. Elderly residents began sharing fragments of memories they'd long suppressed, and younger generations discovered family diaries that painted their quiet town in a new light. Each passing day brought fresh discoveries, turning their small community into a living museum of secrets and whispered truths. Sarah Thompson's role as town librarian had always been more than just maintaining books. Her family had served as keepers of Willow Creek's written history for 3 generations. One rainy afternoon, as she reorganized the library's restricted section, she discovered something that would change everything. Behind a false panel in an old card catalog, concealed for decades, lay a collection of letters that made her hands tremble with excitement. The correspondence, exchanged between her grandmother and members of the Guardians, revealed that St. Michael's served as more than just a waypoint in their network. It was a central hub where important documents and artifacts were preserved. The letters spoke of a special collection, referred to only as the legacy, which required protection from those who might misuse its power. When Sarah shared her discovery with John and James, the historian's demeanor shifted notably. His scholarly detachment gave way to an intense focus as he pored over the letters, comparing them with his own research. "The legacy isn't just documents," he explained one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's knowledge that could change lives, knowledge that some people would do anything to control." Arthur, who had been quietly observing these developments, began experiencing more vivid dreams. He would wake up reciting phrases in the same unknown language as his lullaby, words that made James's eyes widen with recognition. After much hesitation, the historian finally admitted that the language was an ancient form of Latin, used exclusively by a secret society of scholars dedicated to protecting forbidden knowledge across centuries. The implications of this confession rippled through their small group. John recalled Margaret's words about the Winters family. The husband hadn't been merely a scholar, but a guardian of ancient texts. He had fled when certain organizations had shown dangerous interest in his work. The pieces were forming a pattern that both thrilled and terrified them. Following Margaret's map, John and James decided to investigate the Miller property. Arthur insisted on joining them, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that answers awaited him there. The property had remained untouched for decades, protected by local superstitions and the town's unspoken agreement to leave it undisturbed. As they approached the old Miller house, Arthur's pendant grew warm against his chest. The symbol seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light, responding to something only it could sense. Inside, they found the house exactly as Mike had described, frozen in time, with dishes still set on the table and books open on desks, as if its inhabitants had simply vanished mid-moment. The basement held the greatest revelation. Behind a hidden door, triggered by a mechanism matching the symbol on Arthur's pendant, they discovered a room that defied time. Preservation cases lined the walls, each containing carefully protected documents, artifacts, and journals. Among them was a leather-bound diary belonging to Elizabeth Winters, dated 1946. James handled the journal with reverence, his experienced hands carefully turning its delicate pages. The first entry began with words that made Arthur's heart race. "To our beloved child, if you are reading this, then the Guardians have succeeded in their most sacred mission. You have found your way back to where it all began, and now you must learn the truth about your heritage and the responsibility that comes with it." Elizabeth Winters's journal revealed a story more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. In elegant handwriting that filled page after page, she described a centuries-old society of scholars and protectors who had preserved knowledge deemed too powerful for those who might abuse it. The Winters family had been part of this lineage for generations, each member sworn to protect what they called the Luminous Legacy, a collection of discoveries and wisdom that could transform lives if used wisely. Through James's careful translations, they learned that Elizabeth had been more than just a mother. She was a gifted linguist who had decoded ancient texts that spoke of healing practices and harmonious living with the natural world. Her husband, Thomas Winters, was a brilliant researcher who had discovered scientific principles that were far ahead of their time. Together, they had dedicated their lives to ensuring this knowledge would survive and eventually reach those who would use it for the benefit of humanity. Arthur sat in rapt attention as James read from the journal, his pendant warming with each revelation. Elizabeth wrote of a prophecy that spoke of a child who would bridge two worlds, the ancient and the modern, and bring the hidden knowledge back into the light when the world was ready. The pendant Arthur wore was not just a symbol of the Guardians, it was a key, encoded with information that could unlock the full scope of the legacy. The journal entries became more urgent in their final pages. Elizabeth wrote of increasing pressure from organizations that had learned of their work. She and Thomas had made the heartbreaking decision to separate their family temporarily to protect both their child and the knowledge they guarded. They had chosen St. Michael's as their sanctuary, knowing the Guardians would watch over both. Margaret's involvement became clear through a series of letters tucked into the journal's pages. As a young woman, she had been instrumental in orchestrating the plan to protect the Winters' child, Arthur. She had worked with a network of trusted allies to ensure he would be safe until the time was right for him to discover his true heritage. The orphanage where Arthur had grown up wasn't a random placement, it had been carefully chosen and monitored by remaining members of the Guardians. James finally revealed his own connection to the story. He wasn't just a historian, he was part of a new generation of Guardians, dedicated to protecting the legacy and finding the Winters' heir. His research had led him to track down various children who matched the profile, but when he saw Arthur's pendant and heard him recite the ancient Latin phrases, he knew his search was over. The revelations continued as Sarah joined them in the basement room, bringing town records that filled in crucial gaps. The Miller property had been more than just a safe house, it was a crucial link in the Guardians' network. The family hadn't vanished, they had strategically removed themselves to protect the location's secrets. Their disappeared dinner table was part of an elaborate plan to make people believe the house was abandoned suddenly, ensuring no one would look too closely at what lay beneath. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows through the basement windows, Arthur found himself drawn to a particular preservation case. Inside was a musical manuscript covered in notations he somehow recognized. James explained that it contained the lullaby Arthur had dreamed about, a melody designed to encode crucial information about the legacy's location and contents. Elizabeth had sung it to him every night of his early life, knowing that even if they were separated, the song would remain in his subconscious, guiding him back when the time was right. In the days that followed their discoveries at the Miller property, Willow Creek transformed from a quiet town into a hub of careful but excited activity. The basement room's contents were meticulously cataloged under James's supervision, while Margaret, despite her frail health, insisted on being present to witness the legacy she had helped protect finally coming to light. The truth about Arthur's heritage brought with it both joy and responsibility. Through Elizabeth's journal and James's guidance, Arthur began to understand the full scope of his parents' work. The legacy wasn't just ancient texts and scientific discoveries, it was a blueprint for using knowledge to heal and unite people. His parents had understood that the world wasn't ready for all of this knowledge at once. It needed to be revealed gradually, guided by wisdom and compassion. John watched with pride as Arthur grew into his newfound purpose. The boy who had once searched through church garbage for food now stood tall, studying the ancient texts with determination and asking increasingly insightful questions. The town's initial skepticism had transformed into support, with residents offering their various skills to help protect and preserve the legacy. Sarah Thompson established a special section in the library's restricted area, creating a carefully curated collection that would help future generations understand the importance of Willow Creek's role in protecting knowledge. She worked closely with James to develop a system that would allow the gradual sharing of the legacy's contents with researchers and scholars who proved themselves worthy of the trust. One morning, as autumn painted the hills around Willow Creek in brilliant colors, Arthur made an unexpected discovery. Hidden within the musical manuscript of his mother's lullaby was a message written in the same ancient Latin he had spoken in his dreams. James translated it with tears in his eyes. "To our beloved son, your father and I always knew this day would come. We are more proud than you can imagine. The legacy is now yours to protect and share, guided by the wisdom of your heart. Know that our love, like the knowledge we protected, is eternal." The message came with a final gift, coordinates to a location in the hills where Elizabeth and Thomas had left personal items for their son. Among them was a letter explaining why they had to separate, written with such love and hope for the future that even John found himself moved to tears. They hadn't abandoned Arthur, they had sacrificed their own happiness to protect him and the legacy until the world was better prepared to receive it. As winter approached, Willow Creek settled into a new normal. The church continued its regular services, but now with a deeper understanding of its historical role. The Guardians, under James's leadership and with Arthur's growing involvement, established a foundation dedicated to preserving and gradually sharing the legacy's wisdom. They named it the Winters Institute for Historical Preservation, a tribute to the family whose sacrifice had made it all possible. Margaret lived to see her life's work come full circle. Before she peacefully passed in her sleep, she spent hours with Arthur, sharing stories about his parents and the early days of the Guardians. Her final words to him were, "You've brought light back to Willow Creek, dear boy. Your parents would be so proud." Arthur's story spread quietly through the Guardian network, bringing hope to those who had dedicated their lives to protecting knowledge. The boy who had arrived at St. Michael's with nothing but a pendant and broken pieces of his past had become a symbol of resilience and the power of truth to emerge when the time was right. John often found Arthur in the church garden, tending to plants with the same care his father had once shown for ancient texts. The boy had found more than his heritage in Willow Creek, he had found a home and a purpose. As they worked together, sharing comfortable silences and meaningful conversations, John realized that sometimes the greatest mysteries lead us exactly where we need to be. The legacy would continue to shape lives for generations to come, but its greatest achievement wasn't in the knowledge it preserved. It was in the way it had brought together a community, healed old wounds, and shown that even the smallest towns can harbor the most extraordinary secrets. In Willow Creek, where church bells still rang out over valley and hill, a new chapter had begun, one that promised to bridge past and future in ways its founders had only dreamed possible. End of story. The story of Arthur, Reverend John, and the secrets of Willow Creek may have reached its end, but like the legacy they protected, there are many more tales waiting to be discovered. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you these unique stories that explore the depths of human connection, mystery, and hope. If this journey through the hidden history of St. Michael's Church touched your heart, we invite you to join our community of storytellers and story lovers. Click the subscribe button to your left to ensure you never miss our weekly tales of mystery and wonder. Leave a like if you believe, like the Guardians, in the power of preserving and sharing stories that matter. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What secrets do you think your own hometown might be hiding? What mysteries are waiting to be uncovered in your local church, library, or historic buildings? Remember, just as Arthur's pendant guided him home, your subscription helps guide us in creating more content that connects, inspires, and illuminates. Join us next week for another extraordinary tale where history, mystery, and humanity intertwine in unexpected ways. Until our next story.